Welcome back to Maryland Family Matters. My name is Jeff Trimbath, and I have the privilege of serving as the founder and president of the Maryland Family Institute. We'd love to welcome you back to this podcast today with our special guest, Madison Doan. Madison is our visiting fellow in education policy at the Maryland Family Institute, and we're here to talk about education in generally and specifically here in Maryland. Madison, welcome to Maryland Family Matters.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here. Mhm.
As we start, I was wondering if you would just give our listeners a little bit of your background. Where did you grow up? How did you get into the education space? Why are you working in this space? All that kind of stuff.
Of course, happy to. So, I was born and raised in Texas. I went to college at Lamar University in Beaumont, Texas. And then right after college, I decided to go work on Capitol Hill. I was always drawn to kind of the education issues there, but my boss at the time was actually the ranking member of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. So
Hmm.
while he certainly cared about education deeply, I think his wife was an educator. It just wasn't his primary focus. So I remember thinking to myself at that point, if education is really what I care most about, then I need to pursue it intentionally. And so I decided that I either needed to work for a congressional committee at that time or go and work for a think tank that was doing kind of serious substantial work in the space. And so while I was on the Hill, I actually completed a congressional fellowship program with the Heritage Foundation. And then during that time, I actually attended a briefing from my former boss, Lindsay Burke, who was then directing Heritage Education's Policy Center, and Jay Green, one of the most respected policy scholars in the education reform space. And I was honestly just captivated by their briefing, how they spoke with such clarity and conviction about education reform and about what it really means to empower families and improve accountability and really strengthen civil society through education. And so that was about 1 to 2 years post COVID. So this is in 2022.
Yeah.
And I think then parents had really just experienced kind of a pivotal moment in education for the first time. They were seeing firsthand what their children were being taught in schools, and they were also seeing what the alternatives were possible. And so shortly after that briefing, I just felt really motivated to apply to join the Lindsay's team. And this fall will actually mark 4 years since I did, and haven't really looked back since then.
So, talk a little bit more. You're about your personal background here and connecting that with your interest in education reform. We were talking about your own family, your mother, career, public school educator. Draw that line for us, would you, between educational reform and actually improving public education?
Sure. Yeah. So my mom has been a public school teacher for the last 30 or so years, and she's loved her time in the classroom. She teaches at a small kind of rural district school in the southeast part of Texas. But, she knew that a priority for her was to put me, when she was raising me as a child, to put me in the best educational environment as possible. And so while she decided to put me in private school initially in Southeast Texas, she eventually moved me over to public school after a couple of years. And then I ended up graduating from the same high school and district that she taught at. But yeah,
Great.
I mean, I think she understands that really a healthy educational choice environment is one that increases competition among all schools, including
Yeah.
public schools. And I think she recognizes that and is excited about the program that just passed in Texas, which is marks the largest school choice bill that we've ever seen.
So it's interesting to hear your personal story with this because often we hear the opposite trajectory. Starting your kid out in public school, something negative happens, and then you search for the alternative, and then you look to try to make that possible for more and more people. But your journey was actually the opposite. That starting in private education, and then under your mom's influence, moving to public and having that be a positive experience for your own personal journey.
Yeah, if I could just add quickly on Jeff, I think a large part of the reason why she decided to transfer me from the private school to choice or from the private school to public school was
Yeah.
because of the choice that she was able to make. So
Yeah.
she
Right.
actually, being a public school teacher, was able to choose all of my teachers from the
Wow.
very time from, first grade up until 12th grade. And so it was that environment of choice where she was able to do that. But so many parents just don't have that opportunity. And so
Yeah.
that's what is so significant about these educational choices is that it actually allows parents to be able to, with these types of programs, be able to choose the educational environment that works best for their child, whether that's private, public, charter, etc. Yeah.
That's great. A great transition now to the question of educational reform and school choice more generally across the country. You made reference to Texas's recent foray into this, the advances that they've made. Before we get to the Lone Star State, what they've done, describe for us the broader context, specifically, let's say over the last 15, 20 years. How has the educational reform space changed over that period?
Yeah, yeah. So it started in the late 1970s, early 80s when we had the first ever voucher school program. And then shortly, a couple of decades later, we had Arizona pass their first called ESA program, but it was specifically for special needs students. And that program was small and but it had substantial impact for especially the families who had special needs children and wanted that access to those kind of educational dollars. But honestly, we didn't see a ton of movement. We saw, a few states here and there pass kind of school choice programs, but 2023 was actually deemed the year of educational freedom by many
Hmm.
educational scholars
Hmm.
because we had just a substantial number of states pass what's called educational savings account programs. And
Yes,
now
there is.
today we actually have 17 states with universal education savings account style
Wow.
programs. And I think
Wow.
roughly it's either 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 kids nationwide have access to a private school choice program. So just been kind of post COVID, just a substantial amount of programs that are being passed and more red states than blue states. But still, I mean, we now have more than 1.3 million children that are currently using these programs across the country.
Wow. Just an amazing growth. Let me throw at you an argument that we often hear in Maryland in response to some of this progress you've talked about. And that is that school choice programs siphon money and kids off of the public school system. How do you respond to that argument that is often thrown up in objection to these programs?
Sure. So I would say, taxpayer dollars are supposed to follow the child. And
Mm.
so, whether that means a public school, a private school, or whatever, parents should not be forced to pay twice if they want to send their child to a different type of educational dollar or a different
Right.
type of educational environment. And so, um, you know, a lot of times parents they're already paying their local taxpayer funds to that local LEA, and while that is that's fine, but parents should not have to pay twice, like I said, and they should be able to take their state funds and be able to go to the environment of their choice, and ultimately, private school choice increases competition among schools. I mean, we've seen that in Florida and many other states where it's increased competition and actually made the public schools better, where there's
Mm.
more expansive programs.
That's great. Yeah, and I would just add to that under a non-school choice situation, you have a situation where parents who choose private education are actually subsidizing the parents who don't choose that for whatever reason, and so
Yes.
currently, right now, there is this indirect subsidy because they're paying their taxes, but they're also paying tuition, and they're not using the public education system. And so,
Yes.
if tomorrow all 1.3 million of those students decide, parents decide, we're no longer going to educate our kids privately, we're going to put them into the public education system. You want to talk about funding issues? That would be a huge funding issue for here in Maryland. So
Yeah.
it's actually a tremendous benefit for the public education system for us to have robust school choice
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
here.
I just add briefly, Jeff, too, we know that school choice programs also save taxpayer dollars. I mean, we know
Yeah.
that just from the research that's been done about the Boost scholarship program in
Yes.
Maryland.
Yeah.
It saved countless millions of taxpayer dollars, because a lot of times school choice programs, they end up costing less and, save additional overhead cost. And so, yeah,
Yeah.
we know this, and we know this across the board for school choice programs.
Glad you brought the conversation down to Maryland here. And as we do that, I want to just make sure our listeners are aware. Madison, we just published a paper, Educational Choice in Maryland, Opportunities on the Horizon, just published last week, in which you summarize sort of the state of school choice here in Maryland. Talk a little bit about what your paper found, and including some of those cost savings. So, what were you trying to get at in this piece?
Yeah. Well, one thing that I really wanted to highlight was that the public support for school choice in Maryland, I think a lot of times that's overlooked. And there's been some public opinion surveying done that says that 74% of Marylanders with school age children and 84% of actually African Americans with school age children support education savings account programs. And I mean, that's just, I mean, you're talking about three-fourths of the population there in Maryland that's supporting
Right.
school choice.
Yeah.
But yet Maryland has a very limited school choice environment. I mean, you do have charter schools, but most of those are limited to kind of the Baltimore City area. And
Mhm.
then you have one small private school choice program called Boost Scholarship Program, which in itself is a fantastic program that's providing incredible opportunities for those families,
Right.
but it's
Right.
very limited in its scope. I mean, we're talking maybe 2,500 families that are able to participate in the program per year. And there's a substantial wait list,
Mm.
of
Mm.
families that want to participate in the program. And so one thing that I talked about in the bill, one thing I talked about in the paper was kind of the legislative landscape for school choice in Maryland. Over the last couple of legislative sessions, we've had multiple school choice bills that have been introduced. The Right to Learn Act would have expanded the Boost Scholarship Program. Who
Mm.
had a HB 675 that proposed a universal ESA program.
Mhm.
But most of these bills, I mean, they just didn't even advance beyond the committee. They were completely shut down. And so I know Fox 45 Project Baltimore has done some kind of investigating related to the influence that the Maryland Teachers Unions has on kind of the state of education in Maryland. And, maybe some of the contributions to some of those bills potentially dying. But, I think it's evident that parents and families really want a more robust school choice environment in Maryland. And unfortunately, they just aren't getting it right now. And I think, the governor has recently said, during National School Choice Week that he wants to see kind of more choice and is proud of the private school options that you have in Baltimore and
Yeah.
Maryland, et cetera. And so I think, we really need to take that a step further and pass more school choice bills and allow more educational opportunities for families.
A great point. And we are in the middle of this discussion here in the state with regard to the federal school choice tax credit program. This program that was passed HR 1 last year on the federal level, which is a tax credit for all Maryland taxpayers. They can take that credit as they make donations to scholarship granting organizations that benefit kids in both public and private settings. And the question is whether Governor Moore will be consistent with the words that you just quoted him saying from National School Choice
Mhm.
Week. Will he be consistent and opt into this program? We obviously think he should for a variety of reasons. But talk a little bit about that program, that opportunity that currently exists here in Maryland for Maryland kids.
Sure, sure. Yeah. So the tax credit scholarship program that you're referring to. So this is, will result in kind of a $1,700 donation from individuals who decide to opt in for the program, and it'll go to a scholarship granting organization that will then give out scholarships to students.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, been a substantial amount of kind of research done into what the estimated contributions will look like from states, all across the United States. And I pulled out kind of the estimated contributions from Maryland, and you're talking about um, more than $500 million if they have like a 30% take up rate in the state.
Yeah.
Would be
Yeah.
potentially be able to be used in the state of Maryland, and that's more than 50 times what is appropriated annually for the Boost Scholarship Program. So you're talking just about a substantial amount of money. And then in terms of student eligibility, I did some research and try to figure out how many students or approximately how many students would be eligible for this program, and found that
Yeah.
approximately 94% of children living in Maryland could be eligible to benefit. So just an
Yeah.
astronomical amount of children that could be able to benefit from the program. So I think while
Yeah.
the key is to pass more kind of school choice programs, including education savings account programs in the state, this would definitely
Mhm.
be potential effort to allow more choice for families in Maryland. Mm.
Yeah, huge opportunity, tons of resources available to help Maryland families and children if the governor will decide to opt in to this program. That's the big hook. And so we're trying to work a variety of angles to get him to yes on this question. We know that his fellow Democrat governor of Colorado, Jared Polis, announced in December that he is going to be opting his state into that program. We know that Obama's former Education Secretary Arnie Duncan has publicly said Democrat governors should opt into this program in a Washington Post op-ed a few months ago. So we're having conversations. In fact, I was met with the House Speaker yesterday
Mhm.
and encouraged her to embrace this program. I love the fact that she brought up the wide, broad public support for this. We did some polling actually in January of this year and found that 80% of Democrats support this program, a
Well,
higher percentage than Republicans in Maryland. And so there really is no reason for the Democrat leadership in Annapolis to say no to this. So I really appreciate your research for us. Uh, Madison, we appreciate your public advocacy for these issues. Not only have you produced these wonderful research papers that we've distributed in Annapolis, but you have done press events, you've done op-eds for us. You've been a real champion for education choice here in Maryland. And I just
thank
want
you.
to say thank you for your work for us. For those of you who want to follow Madison's work, please go to marylandfamily.org. Click the subscribe button. You'll get access to all of her research and all of the ways that she is contributing and you are contributing to this important issue here in Maryland. And thank you so much for being a guest on Maryland Family Matters today.
Mhm. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. It was wonderful. Mhm.